West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
This is an appeals court hearing that we heard today where we could hear in real time the arguments from the lawyers on both sides about gagging Donald Trump. Now, Jack Smith did win the first round in the D.C. coup case, but that gag order has not been in place. Indeed, it was held for this review today. The special counsel's team says Donald Trump has clearly shown in his violent rhetoric and his calls for violence and his calls for other things that sound like basically witness intimidation means he has to be gagged. But Trump's lawyers say the gag order, first of all, is overly broad, but second of all, they think the whole thing in its entirety is basically a violation of the First Amendment and the free speech rights afforded to everyone, including especially a presidential candidate who's engaged in political speech, which of course can include legitimate criticism of the current administration, which oversees the Justice Department. Now, Special Counsel Jack Smith was in court today, and despite the judges pushing back at prosecutors at times, we could tell you one headline from the New York Times is this. They write that based on the arguments which we heard today, there's been no ruling yet, of course, but based on the tenor and the substance of what the judges said in their questioning, it looks like the court is poised to hand Jack Smith a win, keeping the gag order, although the judge is signaling they may narrow it. Now, like I mentioned, we have obviously had other court hearings in this case, including at the lower court level, after Jack Smith indicted Donald Trump as a defendant. Indeed, if you think back a ways, I attended one and told you guys about it. Glenn Kirshner and I spoke about it at the federal courthouse. One difference that goes to how we learn things was those district court hearings, lower level, don't give us live audio. Now, you may be thinking, what about Supreme Court and other times where it seems like the day of we get a lot of audio? Well, in the appeals court process, depending on the hearing, you can sometimes get same day audio, which is very interesting because it takes us inside the room. If you've ever had a text message that doesn't always give you the full flavor of somebody saying the same thing, well, this is kind of like the court version of that. And so we have some great guests standing by, but first I want to share with you some of these new highlights, audio from today's arguments.
The order is unprecedented, and it sets a terrible precedent for future restrictions on core political speech.
He's a high-profile public figure who posts lots and lots and lots of followers. He's expressing his views as the First Amendment allows.
It's the sheer number of occurrences. It's not the role of the government to dictate what topics are appropriate or necessary to discuss in the context of a political campaign.
When the defendant engaged in repeated inflammatory personal attacks on someone, there's a causal link between that person then receiving harassment, threats, and intimidation.
That last statement from one of Jack Smith's top appeals litigators here, and you know when you're dealing with something as unprecedented as the federal criminal trial of a former president, you're going to have appeals. So Jack Smith has proven to be pretty organized. We've looked at that. This is one of the people he picked to deal with exactly this situation, where something that would be really automatic in any other case. If you are accused of crimes against the United States government linked to a violent insurrection, and you blatantly, publicly impugn people, attack witnesses, attack court officials and do other things referring to violence, yeah, you're going to get a gag order. Now, there are differences, of course, that are legitimate, which is to say, not just holding back because someone's a politician. That's not how it's supposed to work. But the public interest issues that are raised by someone who is running a campaign can be different. And the First Amendment does, as lawyers say, care about that. And these arguments we know were of interest to the judges. We cannot predict how they're going to rule. I told you the New York Times interpretation, but we know the judges were interested because they allot a certain amount of time. It's usually kept, but they can go over if they want. They are the judges in charge. And this argument today went longer than the schedule. The judges grilling both sides for over 2 hours.
Would your position be any different if it were a year ago?
Certainly a year ago, we would still be in the midst of a political campaign. I believe President Trump...
When are we not in a political campaign? Would your position be any different a year ago?
I think the gag order would still be unconstitutional.
Would your position be any different?
I don't see how it would
Okay, so the fact that we have a campaign going on does not matter.
The judge there doing what appeals court judges do sometimes, which is push the person to concede or deal with something on the record. And the point isn't that Donald Trump has no First Amendment rights, but rather that some of the rhetoric from his lawyers saying, well, we're in a campaign right now, and that's something we know the client Donald Trump cares a lot about because he timed his campaign to start earlier thinking it might help him somehow. Well, the judge is basically saying, well, if your position's the same no matter what, and it's a constant campaign, or it's always been that you want the gag order to say it's unconstitutional, that doesn't really matter that we're in a campaign. Now, again, that's an interesting exchange that we wanted to highlight for you. We don't know whether that means these judges will come down to completely side with Jack Smith and gag Donald Trump thoroughly and fully, or something in the middle, or overturn the whole thing. The New York Times reporting, as I mentioned, by the end, the judges signaled they would likely narrow the scope of people covered by the gag order, including potentially freeing Mr. Trump to attack Prosecutor Jack Smith himself, who was, as mentioned, sitting in that high-profile court hearing today. Now, we have more excerpts coming up because we're kind of going to go through this together and make it all make sense. But I want to bring in our special guest, Maya Wiley, former SDNY civil attorney, and David Kelly, former SDNY criminal chief. So he ran all the prosecutions there. And I should mention my former boss. Welcome to both of you. David, from the quotes I just showed, as well as any other of the hearing that you gathered, where do you see this headed?
Well, first, let me say this was a fun argument for a lawyer to listen to because the bench was really hot, meaning that they just didn't pick up these briefs 5 minutes before getting in the bench. They really focused on this. I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is they're probably going to tinker with this ruling, with Judge Sutchin's gag order, and they're going to keep it in place, but they're going to tinker with it a little bit. I think what we're seeing here is a collision between the First Amendment protection of political free speech and the sanctity of criminal proceedings. What kind of bugged me about the whole thing, and I don't think this is something that's really going to resonate with the judges, is that, you know, in lots of criminal cases, judges look at what defendants have chosen to do. It's their choice to do, and at the end of the day, the criminal proceeding takes precedent, and they have to make some sacrifices in their own life. And in this case, former President Trump has chosen to enter a campaign, despite the fact that he knew when he entered the campaign that if criminal charges were imminent, and that he would have to make some sacrifices. And I think that the sanctity of the criminal justice proceedings here are going to probably win out a little bit here, where, you know, the low-hanging fruit, Jack Smith, the judge, and so forth, he's going to be able to criticize. But to go beyond that, to make any sort of statements or actually retweeting, as he did earlier today, kind of threatening communications to the general public, I think will be prohibited. And I think ultimately it should go up to the Supreme Court, will be upheld.
Interesting. And I'm going to play some more and bring in Maya. But just on that point, David, you're basically reminding us or showing us how this isn't a black and white, one size fits all thing, and that going after what might be called the court process and the regular civilians who are called into this, who are called in to do their civic duty, might, by the judges, ultimately be looked as much more off limits than, say, criticizing Jack Smith, who is a big boy and part of the government. And sometimes to make your case both in and out of court, you may criticize that.
I think that's right. And look, I think witnesses are going to be protected. I think jurors are going to be protected. I mean, the type of information that may unfairly influence a jury is going to be off limits. But I think there's going to be a lot that he's going to be able to say. Critical of process, critical of administration, it's a political persecution, all the things that legitimately he should be able to say in advancing his campaign is going to be fine. But those things when he kind of targets, and this is a tough question, targets, when he starts focusing on kind of the things that are only particular to this prosecution, witnesses, facts, and things like that, I think will legitimately be off limits because it really doesn't go. I mean, they use this, this notion, core political speech, which is what Trump's lawyers tried to hide behind. I don't think is going to fly. I also don't think, one of the things, the big weakness I saw in Trump's lawyers' argument was every kind of hypothetical that was posed to him. And you're right, appeals court judges do this. And that's one of the fun things about making appellate arguments. You have to really think on your feet. And in almost every instance, his response, well, it depends on the context. And if I'm a judge, I'm thinking, okay, I'm giving you all the context, and that's it. And he kept on pushing, but you need context. Well, guess what? You have to have prophylactic measures here because we're talking about the sanctity of criminal justice proceeding, and we're talking about potentially the safety of witnesses.
Yeah, and I don't want to echo that, David, and bring in Maya. I don't want to, overemphasize the point, Maya, but if you're trying to have the refs call a game and somebody's standing on the sidelines, either holding a gun or encouraging 100 other people to come down and do the violence for them. Maybe they're not the type of person who does it themselves. Maybe they're the type of person, say hypothetically, Maya, who likes other people to take the risk and do the dirty work. Yes, it's going to affect human beings when the specter of violence is in the air. I say that to bring it out to you, Maya, and play one more brief part here where they brought up, and again, I'm not exaggerating, Donald Trump did call or muse about the murder, the assassination of a United States general. Take a listen to this part.
So what's not fair game? So he can comment.
Yes.
And he can comment very critically. What can he not do?
Use the sort of inflammatory language that poses a significant risk that they will be subject to threats, harassment, and intimidation. If the defendant were to say, not with any reference to their testimony, but say this person, is a coward, a liar, and a treason, and deserves the punishment of death, without any reference to what the substance of their testimony would be, I think that would still violate the order.
Maya?
Well, yeah, I think this goes straight to what is so complicated and interesting about this process, as David said. And I do agree with David that I think there is still going to be some form of gag order here. And the question is on what? But this is why, like our constitutional order and the First Amendment is based on this notion that we want a free expression of ideas. And particularly for political speech, that's the speech we protect the most. And we particularly care about it not restraining it before someone's able to make it. And, that's what we call the prior restraint. And you can see the judges kind of testing this out. What is the limit? Like, when is a political candidate able to talk about someone because they're a candidate for office? And this is a person arguably attacking them, at least in the form of making statements out in public. So what can Donald Trump do? And this interchange is actually a really interesting example of what's the boundary in an unprecedented situation.
It is Tuesday, the 21st of November of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl. And she will be seating you directly for our especially special, daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Okay, got part of it out, and I'm not going to give the rest because, mix it up a little bit. Just a little bit. Hi, how are you? Well, we have quite a few offerings here in the salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we begin. In the Bistro Cafe, as we await the chef's table, maybe go on its way to the speakeasy. That's right. But anyway, we do have quite a bit of fine offerings for you today, so I'll probably forego most of the pleasantries, or maybe I won't. We'll see how it goes. Regardless, I wanted to make mention about this AI chat thing, the imbroglio that's occurred with the CEO of Chat GPT. Is that what it is? Chat AI Chat GPT. And how he was summarily dismissed by the board, and the company has only about 700 and some odd employees, and well over 600 had tendered their resignations if they weren't given an explanation for why he was dismissed. And it has really roiled across the spectrum, from the financial community all the way up to the halls of Congress, and they're wondering what's going on. And I've seen any number of news stories how it is so important that we have AI in the midst of all of this. And it is one of the worst examples of corporate board overreach, or corporations having an overreach, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I've only seen a couple of stories about the actual makeup of this company. It's a nonprofit. The board is a nonprofit. The board does not profit from the profits of this nonprofit. In fact, as I understand, the board consists of 3 members, academics. And what is their task? To make sure that this new invention doesn't turn into Skynet and destroy us all and send Terminators all over time to find us and track us down and bring us back to torture us forever and ever and ever, but just keep a few of us alive. Because their prime directive is to torture the humans. And if you don't have humans, you won't be able to fulfill your prime directive. Yeah, that's right. A Philip K. Dick story right there. Put them all together. And these board members determined that this fellow was not being transparent. What was he not being transparent about? Military applications? Because one of the benefits I saw AI touted as was to make the battlefield safer for civilians. Why have a battlefield at all? And the last thing I would want AI to have is how to make the battlefield safer. That doesn't seem like what they're actually doing. And I have my suspicions about what the direction of this company was heading, and I think the board head them off at the pass. But on the other hand, everybody else was happy to snatch him up, and everybody else is getting tens of millions of signing bonuses to sign with Google and Microsoft, etc., etc., etc. Okay. We might be able to find a cure of cancer, but there's not one cancer. There's a bunch of cancers. Okay? So when you tell me you got a cure for cancer, it's like a big thing to do. If AI can cure all of that, that's very nice. But I sure as hell don't want Skynet sending Terminators across time to track us down. It just doesn't seem like it would work in a representative democracy in any era or eon. Oh, boy. Sounds like a libertarian paradise, though, if you ask me. That's right. We'll figure him. You can take him to court after you're dead. Oh, thanks. Can't we just, take him to court before I die to stop him from killing us? No. You don't have standing then. It's only after you're dead that you have standing. Oh, thanks. I guess that's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't know whose happiness. Okay, enough of that goings on. What do we have going on here in the Bistro Cafe of this fabulous salon, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Is it fabulous? It's fabulous enough. Well, yes, at the top, prosecutors for Jack Smith clashed in the D.C. Court of Appeals with Trump's legal team over the gag order in the D.C. election crimes case. I wouldn't really say it was Trump's legal team. It was this guy named Sauer, and boy, did he talk fast, and he had a very sour disposition, if you ask me. People are named what they are. I'm just saying. On the rest of the menu, a Republican former congressional staffer and a Democratic state senator face off in a Utah special election today to replace Republican U.S. Representative Chris Stewart. Might be a pickup, but I think the Republican is favored. Las Vegas hotel union workers voted overwhelmingly to approve their contract agreement with casino giant Caesars Entertainment. Oh, wow. In Vegas, too. And the Republican Party argued New Mexico's state Supreme Court should strike down a congressional map that has divvied up a politically conservative oil-producing region into multiple competitive districts, and you can't have that. I don't know what they're going to get. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a parliamentary committee hearing in Israel descended into chaos as far-right lawmakers screamed at the families of people taken hostage by Hamas. And the president of Cyprus wants an experienced team of financial crime experts to help with investigations into old and new allegations that Cypriot financial service providers helped Russian oligarchs skirt international sanctions. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Forego the usuals as we ease into the holiday weekend. And I should give a heads up, we're going to have a mix of regular and holiday programming on Thursday, and then probably another mix on Friday. And with that day, we will more than likely have a offering of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, but we're going to most likely take the day off on Thursday. Pretty sure. But regardless, we're going to go right into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And it's out of the Associated Press by Mead Groover. Voters in Utah will choose between a Republican former congressional staffer and a Democratic state senator in a special election today, Tuesday, to replace Republican U.S. Representative Chris Stewart, who recently resigned. Republican Celeste Malloy, who is Stewart's former chief counsel, and State Senator Kathleen Reeby, who as minority whip is the number 2 Democrat in the state Senate, are competing to become the first woman in Utah's congressional delegation since 2019, and only the 5th in history. Malloy, a southern Nevada native and a resident of southwestern Utah, is the heavy favorite in the Republican-leaning 2nd Congressional District, which stretches from southern and western Utah to Salt Lake City. The winner will join the state's 3 other Republican U.S. House members. The state's 2 U.S. senators are also Republican. Malloy campaigned on improving security at the U.S.-Mexico border. Oh, really? Sounds pandering to me. Reining in what she calls out-of-control federal spending. You know, like SNAP benefits for poor kids, especially poor kids of color. Take the food out of that kid's mouth. Protecting religious freedom, you know, the freedom to push their religion all down your throat, right out your sphincter. What? And putting Utah more in control of natural resources on its federal lands. They want everything. All I can say is that Mountain Meadows, I'm not ever going to let them forget it. Mountain Meadows. Look it up. So, Long Island native who lives in Salt Lake City suburb of Cottonwood Heights, Reby campaigned on her background as a teacher. She promised on her website to continue to teach 5 days a week while campaigning on more affordable housing, support for labor unions, and public education based on student needs and community values. You know, the woke values of us baby blood-drinking, commie liberal Democrats. Vermin. We are vermin. Well, Malloy dominated in fundraising, bringing in almost $600,000 and spending more than 3/4 of that over the 7 months leading up to the election. Reby brought in half that amount and spent about 90%. The most recent woman to represent Utah in the U.S. House was Mia Love, who served from 2015 to 2019 and was the state's first black congresswoman. 6-term congressman and U.S. Air Force veteran, Stewart set off a Republican scramble to fill a seat after his announcement in May that he was resigning to care for his ill wife. Malloy rode a wave of rural support in a 3-way Republican special primary on September 5th, beating former state rep Becky Edwards and business person Bruce Hoff. There was no Democratic primary after Reby was the top vote-getter in a Democratic convention and unopposed for her party's nomination. Well, it is Utah. Yamat of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Las Vegas hotel union workers voted overwhelmingly on Monday yesterday to approve their contract agreement with casino giant Caesars Entertainment, signaling an end to lengthy labor disputes that had brought the threat of a historic strike to the Strip. The Culinary Workers Union announced the 99% of the vote favored the new 5-year deal. The union is expected to also approve its proposed contracts with Wynn Resorts and MGM Resorts International, the Strip's largest employer, later this week. the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Republican Party urged New Mexico State Supreme Court to strike down a congressional map that has divvied up a politically conservative oil-producing region into multiple districts as it reshaped a swing district along the U.S. border with Mexico. The High Court heard oral arguments without ruling yesterday, Monday, on the congressional map from Democratic state lawmakers. The Democrats say a congressional swing district in southern New Mexico remains competitive even with the ouster of a Republican incumbent in last year's election. The High Court's ruling could influence which party represents the state's second congressional district, where U.S. Democratic U.S. Representative Gabe Vasquez is seeking a second term. The district is one of about a dozen in the national spotlight as Republicans campaign to keep their slim U.S. House majority in 2024. Courts ruled recently in Alabama and Florida that Republican-led legislatures had unfairly diluted the voting power of black residents. Legal challenges to congressional districts are also ongoing in Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah. Wow, what's so similar about all those, I wonder? A New Mexico State District judge ruled in October that Democratic state lawmakers substantially diluted the votes of their political opponents, but that the changes fell short of egregious gerrymandering. Appealing that ruling, the Republican Party said its substantial political minority in New Mexico is likely to be shut out of congressional representation for the entire decade before maps are redrawn again, and they find out that they're just not keeping up with the demographics of the United States of America. As evidence, the GOP cited the 2022 defeat of incumbent GOP Congressman Yvette Herrell to a former city councilman from Las Cruces. Sarah Sanchez, representing Democratic legislative leaders, said evidence in the case doesn't support allegations of an egregious gerrymandering that would entrench one party in power or deprive voters of meaningful participation. Democrats hold every state elected office in New Mexico, along with its 3 congressional seats and 2 Senate seats. I suppose fair is fair, and the court's going to have to figure out what is fair here. I guess so. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
PSA, don't bring hiking boots when walking on tundra. Your feet will get soaked. It's like a wet sponge.
We're almost there. About halfway.
Getting my ass handed to me.
Well, it's a lot faster with snowmobiles.
Hey, I'm Joss Bentley, and this is the final part in a 3-part Science Quickly Fascination series from a fast-warming Arctic. Today, I'm heading to a place called the Trail Valley Creek Research Station, high in the Canadian Arctic. I'm sloshing around with Gabriel Hould-Gosselin. Gabriel is a research assistant for Wilfrid Laurier University in Ontario and the University of Montreal. We actually did his original interviews in French, so you are listening to a combination of field audio and a new interview in English.
I brought you about 60 kilometers north of Inuvik, which is a little town at the top of the Northwest Territories, out near the Tuktoyaktuk Highway in the tundra.
We passed the tree line on our drive. No more trees, just a flat carpet, orange, red, and green tundra. It's unlike any landscape I've ever seen.
There's permafrost all over the place. It's super deep. It's like 400 to 600 meters depending.
So for all you non-metric listeners, that's 1,300 to almost 2,000 feet deep. That's deeper than almost all the world's tallest skyscrapers.
And that's permafrost being permanently frozen ground that doesn't go above 0 degrees Celsius. Of course, the top layer kind of thaws over summer and then refreezes over winter.
That's exactly the part that Gabriel is most interested in.
That's the area that is active, that has bacteria kind of decomposing organic matter and farting out carbon dioxide and methane. I mean, there's this kind of methane bomb that we're talking about in several articles. That's what people are thinking about and thinking.
The more there is, the more trouble we're in.
Oh boy, if things keep on warming, there's a whole bunch of ground that's been frozen for a long time with basically a huge pool of carbon that's just ready to be digested by those methane-producing bacteria.
And that's a huge concern for researchers such as Gabriel.
What's going to happen? And that's the concern. What's going on in the Arctic?
And that's why he's here. There's only one way to learn the answer to that question, and it's with data.
There's been very little real sampling that's been done. I mean, there's more and more stuff that comes out. There's more and more satellites that are put out there that are much better and better at looking at different wavelengths. You know, some of them use radar, some of them use infrared, some of them actually measure directly the amount of methane that's in the air in certain areas.
But those methods are less reliable without actual measurements from the ground.
To validate those measurements, we need ground truthing data. So data that comes from the area that satellite's looking at to kind of compare what's being measured and from up there and then what's being measured from the ground.
And that's why we're standing among a bunch of white tents on red tundra. It's all cleaned up for the off-season.
And it's nice and clean.
Is it not normally this clean?
I mean, normally there's a bunch of people living here, right. There's stuff everywhere. Normally we have a bug net, like one of those kind of area? Gazebo bug net thing.
Yeah.
And then we set up our tents all around here. I mean, normally there's a whole bunch of chairs and, when we get a heater going, people kind of, it's where we eat and just spend our time.
Yeah.
It's tea.
It's great. It's a luxury. In the middle of nowhere.
We make our way to Gabriel's main research station. It's called an eddy covariance tower.
Well, no, a private company installed the tower. I installed all the instruments on it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I spent, 30 hours on it.
So we climbed 20 meters, or 65 feet, up this skinny tower, carrying giant pieces of equipment. Here's what he installed.
So on the tower, for eddy covariance, in principle, there's two main instruments. One instrument that measures the concentration of gas that we're interested in the air, and that uses infrared.
Remember those greenhouse gas farts? This is how science sniffs them out.
So basically, we know per volume the amount of carbon dioxide or water vapor that's in that parcel of air. And we're using ultrasound to measure at about 10 times a second the speed of wind in the X, Y, and Z direction. And then we do the covariance between the vertical movements of wind and the concentration of gas.
Do we have enough towers in the north to get an accurate picture?
No, we do not. It's incredibly difficult and costly to just get something out there. Just to go in those environments is really expensive at a certain point. The biggest challenge that I found doing stuff out there is not necessarily the cold or like the mosquitoes or whatever. It's getting enough power for all of those instruments that measure 24 hours a day, 10 times a second.
Is tundra really that different that we need testing in all these different locations? How does it differ?
You try to draw like not a paint by number, but one of those little and you have to kind of draw a line and the numbers. Yeah. But basically, you get an entire image with 4 points. and you have to draw an elephant. Like, it's not going to look like an elephant. It's going to look like a square. So it's the same thing. Like, we're trying to get a detailed image of how different types of landscapes in the north behave. But if we only have 4 points, we're going to be missing a lot of detail. And maybe some of the details are going to be important.
How big of a problem is this? How worried should we be?
There's been very little real sampling that's been done. I mean, there's more and more stuff that comes out. I don't want to be alarmist. And, there's always the kind of trap for scientists to say, because they don't want to say stuff that they don't know. They just go, well, I don't know. I'm not qualified enough. And then basically that's taken by the media saying, well, we're not sure whether it's a problem. Of course it's concerning. Of course we have to do something. In fact, we're past the point of no return. Things are going to happen. Things are warming up already beyond our control. And the consequences of that are happening now and are going to happen. By how much? I can't say.
Science Quickly is produced by Jeffrey Delvicio, Tuli Cabose, and Kelso Harper. Our music was composed by Dominic Smith. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And for more science news, please go to scientificamerican.com. This podcast was produced in partnership with Let's Talk Science. Thank you for joining our Arctic series. I'm Joss Bentley, and this is Science Quickly.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. When it snows this winter, make sure you clear more than your driveway. Before you hit the road and before you get in the driver's seat, check to be sure that your vehicle's tailpipe is clear of snow. If the tailpipe is blocked, carbon monoxide, an odorless, colorless, and deadly gas produced by your engine can build up quickly inside your vehicle, poisoning anyone inside. To learn more, call 1-800-CDC-INFO. That's 1-800-232-4636.
In 2012 in the United States, about 317,000 motor vehicle crashes involved a large truck. 26,000 truck drivers and their passengers were injured in these crashes, and about 700 died. Trucker safety requires an alert, buckled-up, experienced driver with a reliable vehicle and a strong employer safety program. Seat belts are the most effective way to prevent an injury or death in a motor vehicle crash, but in 2013, 1 in 6 drivers of large trucks didn't use their seat belts. Employers can help truck drivers stay safe by committing to driver safety programs at the highest level of leadership, establishing and enforcing driver safety policies, including requiring everyone in the truck to buckle up, and addressing factors that contribute to crashes, such as drowsy and distracted driving. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
What happened after a high school student newspaper reported staff transphobia, bullying, intentional misgendering of students, and a slew of additional anti-LGBTQ misconduct at the town's middle school? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Last spring, the Amherst, Massachusetts high school student paper, The Graphic, revealed all this, and additionally, that the school had failed to respond to these complaints, failed to protect its students, and that a Title IX investigation had been launched. Until then, no media outlet knew about the story. But after The Graphic's coverage, the scandal became big news, and dominoes fell. 3 middle school counselors were placed on leave. So was an assistant superintendent. The superintendent took a medical leave and later resigned. There's more. The school system refused to release the investigative reports. But in response, the county newspaper, the Daily Hampshire Gazette, appealed to the state superintendent of public records to release the reports, and the newspaper won, and then put the whole disturbing story on the front page. 2 related lessons here. First, small media outlets can be invaluable. And second, the Graphic student journalists are amazing. Their meticulous reporting informed their community and performed an enormous public service. For good reason. They have received a prestigious commendation from the Student Press Law Center, which, on behalf of student journalists and their advisors, promotes press freedom and the First Amendment. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. While New York's bipartisan redistricting commission struggled, the successful California Citizen Redistricting Commission maps were passed unanimously in 2021 with no litigation. New York's commission deadlocked and was overruled by a Democratic-dominated legislature which drew its own gerrymandered maps. Those were later thrown out by the court, and the congressional map is still being contested. Unlike New York's 10-person politically appointed board, California uses an extensive application process for its 14-person board, using the California State Auditor's Office to review and recommend qualified candidates. The top 60 are put into pools of Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated. The California Assembly is then allowed to strike up to 8 candidates per pool. The remaining candidates are the first 8 members who choose the remaining 6 members, 2 out of each of the 3 pools. California's commission follows strict rules about communities of interest, putting shared common interests like water systems and school districts over mapping for partisan power. While analysis by the Princeton Gerrymandering Project shows a Democratic lean versus other map options, proposed state assembly, Senate, and congressional maps received a unanimous vote, and there were no court challenges to the map. One more big difference, while New York's legislature could overrule its commission, California's commission has the final say. Find out more at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day the completion of the Alaskan Highway, or ALCAN, was celebrated at Soldier Summit. There had been proposals for a highway connecting the United States to Alaska since the early 1920s. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt moved quickly to organize its approval and construction. By March 1942, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers broke ground on the $138 million project. More than 10,000 troops were assigned to highway construction. Over a third were comprised of newly formed black regiments. Thousands of pieces of construction equipment were moved through the railroads, including steam shovels, blade graders, tractors, trucks, bulldozers, snowplows, cranes, and generators. In a matter of 8 months, workers carved out 1,700 miles of road between Dawson Creek, British Columbia, through the Yukon to Delta Junction in Alaska, under the most treacherous environmental conditions. Workers arrived in wintry Dawson Creek, pitching their sleeping quarters in snowdrifts. By spring, workers battled flooding rivers, equipment sinking into thick mud, and fears of Japanese bombers. By summer, mosquitoes, dubbed bush bombers, were so bad, workers had to eat under netting. Black workers also battled relentless racism. The Army was still segregated. Black troops faced racial presumptions about their capacity to carry out hard labor. They were determined to break down stereotypes. By fall, white and black bulldozer drivers coordinating the work together were celebrated in the pages of the Army's Yank magazine, Time, and the New York Times. Some historians consider the integrated work crews a factor in President Truman's later move to desegregate the armed forces. According to the New York Times, the Federal Highway Administration calls the ALCAN the road to civil rights. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 33 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the upper 50s. Foggy conditions are now just lifting off in a quite beautiful way, I might add. Partly cloudy later on, with winds light and variable. Clear this evening, then becoming foggy and damp after midnight. Lows in the mid to upper 30s, winds light and variable. Morning fog continuing tomorrow, then cloudy in the afternoon with a slight chance of a rain shower. They're taking away our for sure rain shower to now slight chance. Highs will be in the low 50s, so getting chilly. Winds light and variable. Pollen is still rated as none right here in our little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 24 parts per million, and that daytime UV index remains low at level 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.36 inches. Visibility is at a quarter mile, and relative humidity is at 95%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 50 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 54 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 62 degrees with showers in the vicinity and an advisory for disruptions due to wind. Bagram is 47 and clear. Kyiv is 30 degrees and cloudy. Looks like Hong Kong is 68 and fair. Tokyo is 51 degrees and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 and partly cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 45 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 44 degrees Fahrenheit, fair. And you continue to have a gale warning there in the city of the night. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Dan Layden-Hall of The Daily Beast brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A parliamentary committee hearing in Israel descended into chaos yesterday, Monday, as far-right lawmakers screamed at the families of people taken hostage by Hamas. The concerned relatives appeared at a Knesset National Security Committee session asking politicians not to advance legislation that would allow terrorists to be sentenced to death. The families argued that such a move could put their loved ones in even more danger while still in Hamas captivity in Gaza, but some legislators refused to listen. Lawmakers from the extremist Otzma Yehudit Party, which is pushing for the new capital punishment legislation, ignored the family's fears at the hearing. A man whose wife and daughter are being held in Gaza begged for the lawmakers to stop talking about killing Arabs and start speaking about saving Jews, the Times of Israel reported. "You have no monopoly over pain," Otzma Yehudit lawmaker Alma Cohen shouted back. "We have also buried more than 50 friends." Cohen reportedly continued, "My friend is hostage in Gaza. And by the way, he's never heard of you." Wow. How very nice. Cohen's Otzma Yehudic colleague, Limor Son Har Melech, also yelled at the relatives. "You are silencing other families," he said. Earlier in the hearing, another lawmaker from the party, Savika Vogel, who also acts as the committee's chairman, accused anyone opposing the legislation of representing Hamas more than they represent the state of Israel. When one hostage's family member asked Vogel if he believed the families were being used by Hamas, Vogel answered, "I am hinting that Hamas is trying to exploit you, yes. And I'm not hinting. I'm saying it openly." Bizarrely, National Security Minister and Otzma Yehudit leader Itamar Ben-Gvir appeared to construe the highly confrontational session as harmonious. In a post on Twitter, Ben-Gvir posted a photo of him hugging one of the relatives along with the caption, "We love and embrace the families of the abductees."
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Menelaus Hadjit-Kotsis of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The president of Cyprus said he personally asked an unnamed third country to send an experienced team of financial crime experts to help the East Mediterranean island with investigations into old and new allegations that Cypriot financial service providers helped Russian oligarchs skirt international sanctions. He told the AP in an interview that he wants absolutely no shadows cast over the EU member country because any adverse publicity would hurt efforts to attract quality foreign investment. The president said many probes into alleged sanctions evasion are currently running but would not give details. His request was accepted, and the foreign experts will assist a team of 7 police investigators in sifting through old and new media reports alleging that Cyprus-based lawyers and accountants shifted Russian oligarchs' money through a murky network of companies and trusts in order to avoid their seizure in line with sanctions related to Russia's war in Ukraine. The latest allegations came in several stories published by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists last week. They cited leaked documents claiming to show how some Cypriot firms helped Russian oligarchs move their money around to evade sanctions. I wonder if the third unnamed country might have somebody by the name of Jack Smith involved. I wonder. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.